Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to get started. I am recording this event. Quite a few people were interested in it and I guess had mad Super Bowl preparations to take care of. But so this will be posted on our blog later later next week. Uh, I'm Adam Gordon. I'll be the moderator today, and I'm so grateful all of you were able to join us. I want to start with this Father Keating quote. The spiritual journey can be a lonely road in the beginning. Later, God will give us new friends. I get a little choked up when I read that. God does not take anything away except to give us something better. Love, later, God will give us new friends. And that's been my experience coming into this practice, thinking that the world of meditation would be a lonely one. And instead, it's been rich with connection and friends. And that's really where from this event springs. So this event actually came out of an idea that came to me at last fall's retreat. I met Greg for the first time there, and he told me about bringing meditation into schools. And then I had lunch with Jackie there, and I recruited her to tell us about bringing centering prayer to people who had Alzheimer's. I also asked my friend Brian Mogren to join us. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today, but Brian had organized the month-long prayer tent in North Minneapolis right after the murder of George Floyd, where they were practicing centering prayer literally on the streets. I thought of the gift I had been given to bring centering prayer and welcoming prayer by Zoom to men and women in treatment during the pandemic. And of course, there's the prison ministry that the Minnesota chapter has been supporting since long before the pandemic. All of these kind of swirled around together. And I thought, this is an interesting story, set of stories to share with as many of you as I can, so that perhaps you'd be inspired as well to bring the gift of centering prayer to out into the world, and for you to feel supported in that. It brought to mind for me three more Keating quotes. The first is, service without seeking any return characterizes the ultimate reality. He also wrote, the kingdom is most powerful where we least expect to find it. And finally, this quote about compassion. Compassion is to be and even feel ourselves to be the mother of everyone in the human family. I love that so much. Compassion is to be and even feel ourselves to be the mother of everyone in the human family. I'm going to drop those in the chat for you if you want to hold on to them. They're just so beautiful. All right. So here's how it's going to go today. We're going to start with some centering prayer. After that, we'll take a 5-minute break for everyone to get a warm cup of tea or coffee or cocoa, or stretch your legs and take care of yourself. We'll come back together, and then we'll just have a conversation with our panelists, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end if you want to share your own stories of practicing centering prayer in non-traditional settings. We'll leave a little time for that at the end as well. So welcome back. We're talking about taking centering prayer out into the community. And in a moment, I'll have each of the panelists introduce themselves. We're just going to ask a few questions and we'll go around and answer. And then at the end, as I mentioned before, you'll have a chance to share as well. If you have questions along the way, please put them in the chat and I'll bring them forward. So I gave you a little background when we started, but I'd like now for each of the panelists to just tell us a little bit about themselves before we get into the special setting where you're practicing centering prayer. If you could just take 5 minutes or less and tell us about yourself, how you came to centering prayer, and what your personal practice looks like today. And Jackie, I'll ask you to unmute and get us started.
Great. My name is Jackie Falk. I live in Duluth, Minnesota. I was privileged to be introduced to centering prayer by Meredith Shifsky a long time ago. I'm thinking maybe the late 90s. I don't remember exactly when. COVID gave me the gift of a regular practice of centering prayer, joining the 7 a.m. group in March of 2020, or whenever Carol started it. And that's given me a daily practice. Never quite reached that second sit in the day. Right. I got a late call to seminary. So I've attended seminary. I've served in a parish, and I've served as a chaplain at the jail and was trained in chaplaincy at the hospital. And my first love is teaching scripture.
Thanks, Jackie. And Greg, could I ask you to unmute and introduce yourself?
Yeah, Greg Sicheneder. Live in the Minnetonka Hopkins area. Actually, if I'm really being truthful, my time in quiet prayer started in high school. I had a conversion experience, and my junior and senior year spent a lot of time in scripture, and I was dyslexic, so that meant I had to read things over several times to really comprehend, and then I'd reflect on that. And so I think I was doing Lectio Divina before I had any clue. Stumbled upon Merton and was reflecting on some of his work. And then in college, I was really angry at God one day and was down in the chapel in the middle of the night. And I was doing Bible bingo. And about the third time I opened my Bible and started reading was the Psalms. And then I came to Psalm 46 and read the words, "Be still and know that I am God," and just had the peace of God come over me. And God was saying, I got you, Greg. And then a couple of months later, I was on retreat, and the priest, I don't remember who the priest was, taught us to pray with "Be still and know that I am God," where you drop off one word and just be still and then be quiet. And that's been kind of one of my go-to prayers, since college years. And that's probably 45 years ago. I was more formally introduced to centering prayer by Nori Sears out in Mound about 30 years ago. And that's when I became more familiar with the one or two syllable word, and started reading some of Thomas Keating's work. In my practice over the years, especially when I was working and had young kids, it was 2-3 times a week, 4 times a week, maybe at most. Fitting that in the mornings, and mornings has always been the best time for me. Since retirement, it's become more a daily thing. Last year, I tried to work really hard on that afternoon time, but that's 15 minutes for me, and I'm falling asleep usually. I do have started taking a 7 p.m. time in the chapel, and so usually some of that in the evening is spent in centering prayer as well. So that's kind of a little bit of my history. I'll stop there. I could go on.
Thanks, Greg. The real service of today's event is to give us all an opportunity to have a second sit. So, I see a theme emerging. Mark, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mark Thiel. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. I was first introduced to centering prayer, I believe it was 1992, by Sister Mary White, behind Assumption Church. A friend introduced me to come on over during your lunch hour and spend some time. And I fell in love with that. But that ended, and so did my practice until 2009, I believe it was, when I became a member of St. Stanislaus Parish in St. Paul, off of West 7th Street, and became a regular practice for me. And I try now to, for sure in the morning, first thing in the morning, I have a sit, and then I try in the afternoon, not always successful. And I'm also facilitating centering prayer and Lectio Divina at St. Stanislaus on Thursday evenings. And I'm also a commissioned presenter through Minnesota Contemplative Outreach, which I love, bringing that to a lot of people. And the Holy Spirit keeps grabbing at me and telling me to do more. So I'm very lucky and very grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And I'm Adam Gordon. I also live in St. Paul. 16 years ago, I was a couple decades into recovery. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I had never done the 11th step. The 11th step says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will and the power to carry that out. So for 22 years in AA, I never once meditated. And I was feeling it. And I started searching. And 16 years ago, one of the guys that I knew in the program said, "Hey, Adam, come with me to this meeting I go to at St. Thomas More in St. Paul." And we went to a centering prayer meeting. And I knew right away. I don't know if it was the simplicity of the practice, the gentleness, but my other attempts at meditation fell away, and I knew this was for me. It was really quite a moment. I, like everyone here, and I guess our next event is, how are we going to get that second sit of the day in? I practice for sure in the morning, and I get in some evenings. The meditation chapel for sure helps with that. I had been sober I'd been meditating for less than a year, and someone told me about this meeting that was going on out at Colonial Church, led by a fellow named Dick Young. And I went out to that, and it was called 12-Step Spirituality. And he had taken it under his wing to bring centering prayer to people in recovery. And we met, and he asked for my help, and I've been part of that group since then. And I'm currently co-coordinator of the Minnesota chapter of Minnesota Contemplative Outreach. And like Mark, I just love the organization. I love this practice. I love bringing it to other people. So that's my backstory. All right. So now, and I'll call on someone else to start off our answers here. My next question is, please describe the setting where you facilitate centering prayer that we've talked about. And one, what drew you to the setting and how you got started? Like literally the mechanics of how you got started. Did you ask your way in, or just so we kind of get an idea of the nuts and bolts of how you made this non-traditional setting work? So Greg, I'd like to start with you if we could.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start with I spent my career as a social worker, and I really love working with younger kids. And I was drawn to working with the kids who struggle the most, which we label in the school as EBD, emotional behavior disordered. And I was working in classrooms, the center-based classrooms. So these are the students that couldn't function in the regular classroom because of their behavior, and a lot of kids with a ton of trauma, a lot of mental health stuff. And I was always trying to figure out what could make a difference for these students, so that they could, heal enough so they could make it back to the mainstream classroom. Because while teachers feel like it takes forever to get them into the center-based classroom, once they're in the center-based classroom, you never really get out, typically. And so I started reading some of the research, and they talked about yoga. And so I became certified in Yoga Calm, and Yoga Calm is a combination of yoga, but also breathing, community building, and some reading some meditations. And they use Ready, Set, Relax a lot, which is basically it's geared towards younger children. And then out of that, and I was having some success with that. I knew some of it was working because if there was a fire drill one day, and I went out to be with where the behavior students were, because that's usually where there's some disruption. And one of the students was leading the rest in the tree pose and challenging the others to see how long they could do it. And so I thought, okay, some of this is working, and the kids were talking about it helping too. Um, and then I found, instead of just reading, if I had something on the smart board, so I'd have a waterfall and some music, or I have one with a snow with a fire with a Native American drumming, and then just instead of reading out of Ready, Set, Relax, I made up my own, or we'd have them come up with calming places, and then I'd weave them into a meditation, and then they'd pay attention if I missed any, so they'd pay attention better that way. And then so since I've retired, now I've had a chance to bring it into general ed classroom. And so this year I've been going into Sonneson, and basically working first grade through fifth grade. And I did 3 lessons prior to winter break, and now I'm trying to go once a month to each classroom. And then there's a school counselor there who's following up with some work in between. And the other place where I've been able to bring it is to the local Catholic school. And in there I can add prayer because I'm just feeling this longing, because for me it's about prayer too. Let me just say one more piece. I always felt like my practice of centering prayer helped me to come to work a different way. And as a social worker, there's always some crisis going on. And as I settled into centering prayer more, I think I became more calm and kept getting these responses from people, especially during crisis, that I was just a calming presence. And that to me was my practice of centering prayer, giving fruit. Another thing that I ran into along the way was, it was a book. I wrote it down here because I can't remember names of books. Where is it here? A Still Quiet Place. It's a mindfulness program to teach children. And I still remember reading the introduction, and it talked about, if you have a practice of meditation or willing to develop one and have a deep love for children, this book is for you. And the tears just came, this is a book for me. And so I pulled out a lot of different things about thought watching and about mindful eating and different things of working with kids that I've been able to integrate into my work with kids. The one thing I struggle with, though, some of the students who most needed it didn't seem to be able to access it. And read a lot of places, be careful with the meditation, go slow. But nobody said how to be careful or how to go slow or whatever. And then I was in a kindergarten, first grade classroom and doing a short little meditation. And one of the EAs, paraprofessionals, turned off the lights. And I was going to tell them afterwards, so don't turn the lights off because it's maybe isn't safe. And after this 2-3 minute meditation, she turned on the lights, and the 2 girls in the room just had tears streaming down their face. So I knew I tapped into something. They said they were fine, and I talked to them individually. They were fine, but I just didn't do meditation in there anymore. And then about a year later, I ran into a book by David Treleaven, Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness, where he talks about how meditation can actually re-traumatize people. And so since then, now I've started, anytime I'm working with a group, adults or children, my first session, I talk about trauma and teach them some grounding practices and give them permission to come out of the meditation if they're experiencing trauma. And I think that's been a good thing. And it seems that some of those students who have more trauma have been able to more enter into those meditations. The other thing I've been able to do is go into the Catholic school, and I've been there 2 years now, working with the 8th graders for 4 or 5 sessions. And with them, I'm doing a little bit of Lexa Divina. I'm introducing the centering prayer, but we're doing 2 minutes instead of 20 minutes. And other types of quiet prayer, just breathing, doing a Jesus prayer, breathing in Jesus and breathing out calm, breathing in Jesus, breathing out peace. So a lot of those kinds of things. And in a survey, the last 2 years I've done with the 8th graders, they all indicated that they have learned new ways of prayer, which is one of my goals. And all but 2 in the 2 years I've been there had said that they learned new ways to calm themselves. And so that's kind of my 2 goals. I'm working with them. I think I'll just give you an example here of what I do with kindergartners. So I'll ring the listening bowl and say, show me a thumbs up when you can't hear it anymore. Then I'll repeat myself with your kindergartners because half your thumbs would already be up. When you can't hear it anymore, put your thumbs up, right? And it's surprising how quiet the room gets. Sometimes it's the only time it's quiet in a kindergarten room. And then we talk about what they were thinking, and they're thinking about the tone, or they're thinking about how long it rang, or thinking about how the sound wobbled. And then I comment on how nobody was thinking about something they're worried about that they're doing next, something bad that happened. And that's being in the present moment. And that's being, that's where you can be calm. And even though I can't talk about God in the public school, I just think if we're giving students those moments of quiet, that's a place where God can speak. So I'll quit there. I could go on and on, but I know I have 5 minutes. So
Thanks so much, Greg. That was wonderful. I'm going to ask Mark to go next, but while he's speaking, would you put in the chat the titles of those 2 books that you mentioned? That would be great. All right, I'd like to turn it to Mark, who's going to tell us a little bit about his prison ministry.
Hi. I believe it was the 2016 Minnesota Contemplative Outreach Retreat, and Carol Quest was talking about going to Stillwater Prison to bring centering prayer. And I thought that sounded pretty neat. So I jumped into it. I think I was approved by January of 2017. So that's when I started. Before, it's an interesting kind of dynamic, I think. Before COVID, we had like an hour and a half with the men, one each Monday. So each Monday of the month, we would go in at 1:30, and we'd have until 3 o'clock to be with the men. We usually had a couple of sits. We had some discussion, and you never knew what you were going to see during that time in centering in that group, because sometimes some guys would use it as a way to screw around and pass notes, which is forbidden. So it wasn't always well received. And then we had the pandemic, and we did not have centering prayer for over 2 years. Came back in 22, in August of 2022, and we were reduced to 1 hour from 1:30 to 2:30 on Mondays. Before the pandemic, we had enough volunteers to go in by teams of 2 and to cover every Monday of the month. And now we have officially 2 volunteers, but we are gaining folks, and we can only go in, we only have time to go in twice a month to Stillwater. I want to add too, we have other volunteers who are going into Shakopee Women's Prison that we did not have before, which is very exciting. And I know Ingrid is one of those folks that go into Shakopee. And so we have the 1 hour, and usually it's 2 sits. Usually we don't have time for a second 20-minute sit. It might be 10 or 15 minutes. But I have to tell you that this time around, after the pandemic, everything is very calm, and it's very um, it, very positive and respectful and powerful sits and sessions that we have with the men. And I look at it as like any other centering prayer group that I've been in. It's no different. Once I'm in that chapel, it's like being anywhere else. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And
Thanks, Mark.
and as I turn to Jackie here, would you mind putting your
Adam, you need to be a little louder.
Okay.
I think.
How about now?
Much better.
Mark, would you put your email address in the chat? Anyone who's interested in maybe finding out more about Stillwater or Shakopee, they can email Mark and he'll be able to get you to the right person. So, Jackie, I know the least about your current venue, but I also know that you were in another non-traditional venue. If you want to touch on that, that would be cool too. But however you want to do it. So over to you,
and I'm
Jackie.
going to start off that thanks to Meredith Shifsky, I am now part of Minnesota Contemplative Outreach and passionate about it. So Adam took me back to the past. Among when I was serving at a congregation, Peace Church here in Duluth, I was offering centering prayer every Wednesday, regularly. And one of the people who joined me in centering prayer was a woman who had retired from serving federal prisons, mostly in Wisconsin and Illinois, to Duluth. She joined me in centering prayer. When she retired, she had the itch, and so she got herself as a job as chaplain. We have a large Catholic healthcare facility here that provides for continuum of care from assisted living on, and she was chaplain in the memory unit. She came to me and she said, I see no reason why we can't offer centering prayer in the memory unit, and except that the literature says it doesn't work, and I couldn't find any models for it. I think some of that has since changed. Liz is a force of nature, and she said, nevertheless, I want to try it. And will you volunteer to do it? So we set about, I did some reading. I put together a couple of presentations for the staff about offering centering prayer in the memory unit. We began, it would have been late 2017. And so Adam asked me how you get into the institution. Fortunately, it's a Catholic institution, and so there's more leeway in saying, well, sure, all right, we've got a volunteer here, we'll try something new. And also being able to be really clear about what it was the actual practice I wanted to do. What we set up was that caregiver or the PCAs, the staff nurses, if people couldn't come in on their own, would bring those who were interested in coming into a centering prayer session in the chapel. And we arranged it in a circle, and we had quiet music playing, familiar quiet music. The one thing I've really learned with people in memory care is keep it simple, keep it repetitive, and keep it familiar. Those three principles seemed really important. And so we tried it out, and it was a little bit now this, now that. The head of their spirituality program chose to come out of curiosity, checking up on me. I don't know, but I was grateful to have her there. So we would have a number of people. They would be in chairs or their wheelchairs. Their caregivers would come. What surprised us was a number of relatives would choose to come. And we later on learned, of course, sitting in silence, everybody's just the same. They didn't see the people that they loved as diminished in this time. Adam asked me to mention what I took away. I've taken away whatever I thought I knew about the Holy Spirit. I didn't know squat. So we had this group, and I'm tinkering along. By the time I'm doing it, I'm also serving as chaplain at the jail. And so it means I've got to do the drama drive of getting out of the jail. And Mark knows what that takes. There's no quick in and out of any jail. And get to the chapel and get myself calm, because I am the tone of what happens, and get seated and move in. And I learned to do that. Here was the ritual we've used every time. In the course of working at the jail, I learned a lot about trauma care. And someone hearing their name is so powerful that physiologically it gives them a shot of dopamine. But the language I used is, of course, God already knows your name. And you and God want to hear it together because it's written on God's arm. And I think somebody gave me that, and I think it's in Jeremiah someplace, but I can't tell you for sure. So if we'd all get in the circle, nod at each other, I'd go to each person. I would say hello, to their name, and wait for them to give me acknowledgement back. And then I would say, and do you have a word for us today? And this is, of course, their centering prayer word, but I'm not giving instruction because that's not going to fly every time. And if they had a word, fine. And if they didn't, I would offer them a word. And if they didn't want it, we would just move on to the next person. And I would always say hello to everybody and their name all the way around. And do you have a word? And then we would get back to me. And then I used the app, and we would shut off the music, which had been playing quietly. And then we would pray. I'd use the app, and I'd use a really short prayer. And I usually also edited it to whatever length it needed to be for the setting. And then I started out praying for 10 to 12 minutes. We learned that the optimum is 7 to 10, and that I needed to read the Spirit. I could tell by the rustling whether we needed to close earlier or not. But here's the phenomenon, and caregivers talked about it, and relatives talked about it too. They have so much less wool to have to get through to be down in their spirit. I mean, that sense of spirit and calm and shared presence welled up really quickly. So, and then it would ding and people would come back. And then I would have some kind of closing, something often about the weather, notice for sunshine, some kind of invitation into the week. And then I would go the other way around the circle, and I would say, thank you for coming. It's a blessing to have you here. And it was the same words every time. And again, it's the tone of voice makes a big difference. And greet everybody, and then they would leave. Now, I was able to do that up until COVID. And then both of my ministries had to change drastically with COVID. And my volunteer ministry ended because caregiving situations like that just absolutely shut down. I mean, there was no coming in and out. But the head of spiritual life in the whole facility continued to lead the centering prayer right through COVID. So, and she's still leading it. So when I was preparing today, I called Christine for a few thoughts on what's going on. To her, it's the most important practice she does in the week. She has 15 to 17 people every week. And she said it's her people with the least cognitive ability that are the most loyal to coming to the practice, the quickest to know what their sacred holy word is. It continues to be a place where their relatives can come and just be with them fully, both of them fully sharing the experience. And she said also, it's the fact that the caregivers come. She feels like she has a chance to minister to the employees in that when she doesn't at other times. She keeps on the same 7 to 10 minutes. And she uses the same ritual I used. And she's done centering prayer for 10 years. I have no idea if she's commissioned or not, but who cares? So she said, it's the opportunity to hold one another in the holy preserve each week. And so, and for me, the last part of the anecdote is I did my volunteering in the memory care unit on Wednesday mornings, and I led chapel in the jail on Wednesday afternoons. And I really came to understand it was that time in prayer where all those soon to be angels were holding me in prayer that enabled me. As Mark knows, this was back in the days before discipline, to manage 40 men and women in a chapel situation. So I don't think I have anything to add. Questions, of course. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. Wow. Well, let's put a bow on it with one more question here, and we'll cycle through. I perhaps there were apprehensions or reservations going into any of these settings, expectations. What actually surprised you by the groups that you led? What did they teach you about, and how has it influenced your practice? Jackie, you intimated it taught you something about the Holy Spirit. Maybe you can tell us more about that. But I'd like to actually start with Mark. What surprised you? What have you learned from working with the incarcerated population, and how has it influenced your personal practice?
I've learned so much from the men, and it sounds trite, but they've given me a lot more than I have given them. I've learned how eager they are for rest, how eager they are for silence, and how eager they are for God. And that has an effect on me and what I'm eager for. I always like being there, but to tell you the truth, there's almost a dread in walking into the prison and through those clanging doors behind you. But once I'm in that chapel with those men, it all disappears. And that's surprising for me, that I never learn that it's okay until I get inside that chapel. It's taught me not to take anything for granted. And it's taught me gratitude. But reflecting back on what Jackie just said, centering prayer in that space is like the great equalizer, because everyone is there for the same purpose. And there's no longer a facilitator and an outsider, and those who are inside and those who are incarcerated. It's no longer an I-thou relationship with God. It's a we-thou relationship with God, and it's so freeing, and it's so it brings me to that same conclusion, no matter what group I'm in, that it's we are there together, truly. And that's pretty much what my experience has meant to me. I know it's brief, but it's pretty simple to me. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And Jackie, would you like to share a little bit about what surprised you, what you've learned, and how your personal practice has been influenced, if at all?
Sure. I think I telegraphed my lead, and Mark certainly read it right about the equalization. But I think the most important thing for me is I'm not afraid. I mean, I'm a person that takes great pride and still wants to be the smartest person in the room and wants to know. And I have low tolerance for this idea that God's going to be a mystery. I mean, she and I argue about that regularly. But loved ones of God joined us in that circle that I came in with bias and bigotry, that I could hardly welcome them into the human race. That's my darkest side, they're saying. And in prayer, our spirits, they were there. And their spirit is comes so quickly. And they really are already on the other side of that passage from Revelations, where there's much less pain and much less confusion. And that is daunting to me. But it did take away the fear, much of the fear of aging. And then companionly, Mark might recognize this, it helped me see those I was serving who were incarcerated, and I served both men and women. How much trauma obliterates the capacity to access that spirit. And while centering prayer in the memory unit had to be brief because they were already there. It had to be brief in jail, and I rarely did it for more than 10 minutes successfully because of all of the obstacles to getting there. So I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. And Greg, what about you? I know you came to it from a long practice as social worker and a school counselor, but tell me what surprised you and what continues to surprise you.
Yeah, well, part of it's just that even kindergartners can enter into silence and actually long for that. Went into a third grade class in the beginning of this year, and the teacher told me when one of the students saw me, the student was saying, "Oh, I so need this today." That's what adults say. That's not what third graders say, And it surprised me that, so last year I was going in like 4 times in classrooms. And by about the third time, the students were much easier able to enter into the meditation. And by the fourth time, much better. And that this year, when I'm going back with the same students, how much easier it is for them to enter into it. And I think that comes partially just, there's a safety part of it, that I kind of follow the similar structure. Like we'll always start with a listening bowl or a listening chime, and which has more calming and some kind of teaching, and then some kind of movement, because they need movement before they can sit. And that's one thing I would say with kids I've learned, you need movement before you can sit. um, and but that they can sit and quietly, enter into a meditation is amazing. Also, I happened a couple of weeks ago on a Wednesday mass, which was a school mass, which I totally forgot about. And I used to kind of be annoyed by the school masses. But now when I see the 8th graders that I've worked with their kindergarten buddies, and the priest is talking about paying attention, and their kindergartners facing the back of the room looking for their parents, it's really joyful. And they're waving to me as I go by, just those connections. And I'm surprised that, I offered it, and basically everybody but the kindergartners at Sonneson wanted it in their classroom, and that was their choice. And so that to me was kind of amazing, that basically the whole school saying, yeah, this is worthwhile doing. And then sometimes when it's not going well, I think, why am I doing this? But the rewards are great, and the students all know me. Of course, what I miss most is that I don't know any of them, because if I go in once a month, you don't get to know their names. Where when I was a social worker, you kind of knew a lot of the kids, and so I miss that part. But yeah, it's just a joy for me. The other part I'll say, I was doing it at another school, and then was going through a kind of a rough time with some treatments that I was going through for my health, for some cancer stuff, and and reached out to Sonus and to a couple of teachers because I'd worked there for 12 years previous, and just got a real positive response, and just how welcoming that community was for me and how important that was for me. And I just think that put me in a whole different frame of mind to getting through my cancer treatments. So, you get more back than you ever give, I think.
Thanks, Greg. And thank you, Jackie. And thank you, Mark. I'm going to remove the pins now and join us all back in the big gallery. Yeah, that was quite beautiful. Each setting, each person in their own way. That really was touching and kind of thrilling to me to hear centering prayer brought into these different settings. Perhaps among our gathered here, there are people with either questions or who would like to talk about settings that they have been in and would like to share briefly on their experience. Go ahead, Joni. Thanks for raising your hand.
Okay, yeah. So I had a question. Thank you all. I enjoyed it. Let me see. I gotta lower it. Okay. I enjoyed each of your shares. The one about the prisons, I took AA meetings into county jails for about 12 or 14 years. I can't remember. But how, Ingrid or Mark, how did that get started in Minnesota? The centering prayer in the prisons. Do you know the answer to that? I'd be interested in knowing that. And thank you all again. I love the kids stuff. I love it all. I have a fear of Alzheimer's, Jackie, and so especially when I can't remember anything. But so thank you very much for sharing.
My understanding, and I could be wrong, and it's too bad that Carol Quest is not here because she was one of the first people to bring centering prayer into the prison setting. I don't know about a jail setting, if there are other groups that go back further, but I thought it started about 10 years with Carol, and I thought one or two other folks, and I can't recall what their names are, but I thought that was, when it started.
I was just going to say, no, Father Keating went into Folsom Prison, and that's probably been 20 more years ago. So I guess we should have to say he's the originator of this process. And I think each group started at different times. I know I'm from Illinois, and they don't have any there. They tried to have something there. So different chapters, I think, take it on in different ways. I was going to say once more about the women's prison. I had about 13 or 15 people there, and I was amazed at the age range. There were some girls there that looked like they were 18 or 20, and some women who were probably in their 60s. And this was overwhelming to me because I didn't expect that, and so, and my philosophy was that I wasn't there to do all the talking. So every time I went in, I reminded myself, it's not your show. And it's very emotional to me. I love going there, but I always say this could be you, Ingrid. And so, so I don't talk, and we have talking together on topics that they want to bring up. after we center. Well, actually, I asked them, do they want to center before they talk, or do you want to talk after? So I kind of let them determine how the time is going to go. And unfortunately, right now, the governor of Minnesota has made a lot of changes in prison, so they have a lot of education programs. So that now during the morning time, there's only a couple people that can come. So we're going to switch it to the afternoon. Hopefully more people would come, but everybody in the jail has to either be in a work group and learn something or go to school. So that kind of thing interrupts it. And one last thing is, I have an artificial knee, so every time I go in, I have to get somebody to wand me, and I think, well, isn't this a waste of time? I mean, in prison, there's a lot of waste of time of things, like, okay, I didn't change my knee, it's still the same one. But so they're heavy on the procedures, and it kind of weighs down the inmates, that are there through these procedures. And I can understand how they could generate a lot of anger. And I think centering prayer is good to help them with that procedures and the anger that they build up. Okay.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, for bringing that experience forward. And I'm putting a link to, I've watched many times Thomas Keating, his lead into centering prayer in Folsom Prison. It's really worth watching. I see that Mary Taylor has her hand up. Thank you, Mary. You're muted, I think.
Hello to my fellow 7 a.m. prayers I see on the screen. I wanted to shout out a little bit about doing it in county jail, because I appreciated what you said, Jackie, about people told you couldn't do it in memory care. People are always saying, oh, you can't do it in county jail. It's so transient. People come and go. There's a long list of why you can't do it. But county jail is where the people are the rawest. They've had the worst day in their life. They've lost everything they knew. They've lost their children, probably to foster care. They've lost their jobs, their apartments. Lots of mental illness and lots of drug abuse. And I had been doing one-on-ones, sitting with people for a number of years, teaching them centering prayer on their own, just to find some space in this terribly crowded, noisy, chaotic place. And then they came and said, hey, let's do it as a group. And they designed a pilot project for a 6-week centering prayer. And it was pure gift. And I let them design it. And we did a 5-minute breath prayer, because somehow that got us into it. And there were new people every week, right? And we were always getting buzzed by the corrections officers. I mean, the people who go in there. And I just kept thinking, they are treated with disrespect, and they have no choice in almost anything they do. But when they come into that room and sit around the circle where we're all the same, and they choose, maybe for the first time in the day, a sacred word. And these women, I just have to just say, I always say everything I learned about prayer, I learned in jail, because they encouraged each other. They didn't make fun of each other. They were, they were Jesus to me. They were terrific. But I will say it is easier to get into prison, even though those who go into prison probably wonder why I'm saying that. But prison is hard to get into, and it's hard to be in. But jail is just terrible. And I just went through last year the background checks to get into Hennepin County Jail. But for those of you who have a county jail near you, I would just encourage you to pair up with someone else and try and contact sometimes there aren't chaplains, but contact somebody to get in. Because I think what I found was they were, just like you said, completely ready to be in that place of serenity and trust. Even though we didn't close our eyes, you do all kinds of different things than you do in a regular sit, but please, I just want to shout out for county jails, because prisons are usually where we go, and there's just so much need out there, and there's so much beauty out there when it's practiced.
Thanks, Mary. And Mary did put a link to some resources on the National Contemplative Outreach site in the chat. I saw your hand up there, Jackie. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to echo in spades what Mary said about the rawness of a county jail. And in addition, in St. Louis County Jail is too small for the number they serve, so everybody wakes up in the morning not knowing where they're going to go to bed that night, because they can just get shipped out someplace else to allow for the fact you can't have people who are incompatible in the group. And for a control freak like me, it was a tough lesson to learn that nothing I was doing was going to hold up if some safety need came up. I mean, it just got dumped, chapel, whatever I had planned, program. And the gift that came with that is that when I invited people in to share space with me, and often, Mary's right, what they want is just a moment to be alone in their own heads. They don't even want to hear from me. Is that I could say to them, in all honesty, I was the only person in that jail that they could say no to. If anybody else told them something, they had to do it, and do it immediately under great threat. And the gift of being able to offer that was fabulous. And it's, for me, the talker, it's an absolute kind of humility that disciplined me, which is what centering prayer does for me, is discipline me into humility.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you so much. Well, I feel us winding down today. It's been a really rich session. I am so appreciative. Is there anyone else that wants to bring forward an experience of theirs? So let's put our hands together for Jackie Falk, Greg Sicheneder, and Mark Thiel, and for agreeing to come and share their experience today. Thank you so much. It was as rich as I knew it was going to be, and then some. And I'm just going to read once more this the Thomas Keating quote that I opened with. But I'm wondering, John, would you give us a benediction when I finish our quote? Can I put you on the spot for that?
Sure.
Okay. So the Thomas Keating quote: "The spiritual journey can be a lonely road in the beginning. Later, God will give us new friends. God does not take anything away except to give us something better." Amen. And John will close us with a prayer this afternoon.
Gracious God, thank you for this time, for these people, for the places you call us into. May our hearts be ready to go wherever you call, because you are already there in the faces and lives of the people we meet. Guide us this day deeper into your love. And may the peace of God, which surpasses all human understanding, guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Amen.